everyone! So this week is another bonus vlog because we are starting tart week, and one of the things for the very first week that we are going to make is a tart to 10. But in order to make it, you need puff pastry, and so we're going to make quick puff this week. Puff pastry is two different kinds. There's classic puff and then there's the quick puff. The classic puff takes a little bit longer because it involves taking a hunk of butter and slowly incorporating it into your dough. Quick puff takes the butter and cuts it into tiny little hunks and then adding that to the dough and then proceeding with the folding procedure. So we're going to make that today. You can also buy, if you don't want to make the puff pastry for your tart tatin, you can buy puff pastry at most stores. The downside to buying the store-bought stuff, however, is that a lot of it does use shortening and butter, or just shortening to save a little bit of money. But as you'll see, it doesn't actually cost that much to make it at home for the amount that you're using. If you were to need a huge amount of puff pastry, it might be a little bit more expensive, but for the amount that we're going to need for our purposes, it's not going to cost that much. So it's 4 ingredients. It's water, flour, salt, and butter. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our flour and add it to our KitchenAid. Then we're going to take our butter and we're going to cut it into squares. You want them to be about 3/4 of an inch to an inch in size. So the way I usually do it is I cut the butter in half lengthwise, and then I flip it and cut it in half lengthwise again, and then I just cut squares so they're about this big. And you want them to all be about the same size, because if they aren't, they're going to incorporate into your dough at different rates. And you want to keep as much as that butter structure as you can, because that's where you get your nice flakiness that you see in puff pastry. The next thing we're going to do is we're just going to by hand kind of gently toss this so that each cube is covered in flour. If any of them are sticking together like these guys, just break them apart. And then once they're all incorporated or are covered in flour and not sticking together, we're going to stick it on our KitchenAid. And we're going to use the paddle attachment, and it's going to only be on there for like less than a minute, just long enough to incorporate our water. So the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to scale out your water. And it's actually just a small amount of water, just enough to make the flour stick to the butter, because you want your butter to be super duper cold, because you don't want it to incorporate into the dough until it's time for that. So we're going to scale out. As you can see, I have ice water. You also want your water to be really cold. So now we're going to add the water to our puff pastry, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so we're now going to add our water, and I wanted to do it like this so you could see how you're not incorporating it into a dough. You're just simply adding the water so that you can get all of your ingredients into one space, and so that you could also see exactly how fast this process is. So what you're left with is this like shaggy looking dough. It's not even completely incorporated in the bowl. That's fine. Our next step is going to be to turn it out onto the countertop, and we're going to kind of work that together so that it's in one space. So I'm just going to sprinkle it on my countertop, just a tiny bit of flour. You don't want to do too much flour here because you don't want to incorporate any more flour into the mixture. You just want to have enough so that your butter isn't sticking to your countertop completely. You're just going to gather it together. And you're not going to knead it like you would a dough. You're going to kind of fold it. Because you don't want to work too much gluten in there. If you work too much gluten, you're going to prevent those nice flaky layers that you're looking for. So as you can see, it took literally 3 turns of pushing it down and bringing it together, and now we have this nice dough. So our next step is going to be to roll it out and do what is called a turn. So anytime you make a laminated dough, so puff pastry, Danish, croissant, you do these things called turns. It sounds super fancy, super easy. Once you do it, you'll never forget what it is. You might forget the name, but you know the process. So we're going to roll it out a little bit. I'm going to add a tiny bit of flour. And as you can see, we still have these big chunks of butter in there. That's exactly what you want, because you don't want that to incorporate into your dough too quickly, because then you'll lose the layers that you're looking for. So I have my rolling pen. Don't tell my pastry chefs from school that I'm using this, because they prefer that you use one of the nice wooden ones. I do have one, but it's elsewhere and I don't feel like going to grab it. So we're just going to use this. So you want to, anytime you roll out dough, you want to start from the middle and just work your way down so that you're making sure that you're applying even pressure. And then you're going to rotate it, and you're going to do the same thing. And the reason you do it this way is so that you notice you kind of keep that square that you're looking for, that rectangle. And also you're applying even pressure so that your dough rolls out evenly, so you don't end up with parts of it having like more dough on this side than you do on that side. So you want your dough to be about ½ inch thick or so, and then you kind of want to work it so that it's a rectangle. You don't really want to touch it too much because your hands are warm and you want your dough to stay cold, so you don't want to warm it up, but try and make it into as nice of a rectangle as you can. And then we're going to do our first turn. So you're going to take the top part and you're going to pull it down halfway, and then you're going to take the other and pull it up to the top. So it's kind of like folding a letter. And you just want to make sure that your dough reaches all the way to the ends on both sides so that it's even. And then you're just going to press it down just a little bit to kind of marry the two pieces together. And then we're going to throw this into the refrigerator and we're going to let it chill. This is the part where it gets tricky. You don't want to let it chill too much, but you don't want to not let it chill enough. It's kind of like Goldilocks and 3 Bears. If you let it chill too much, your butter gets too cold and then it doesn't roll out nicely, and it kind of just breaks the butter up, and then you end up with broken pieces of butter. You want it to roll out so that your butter rolls out with your dough, but you don't want it to roll out with your dough so much that it's kind of just smearing into your dough, because then you'll lose your layers. So we're going to let it chill about 10 or 15 minutes. It really depends on how cold you keep your refrigerator. So I would just check on it every 5 minutes or so and see where it's at. So we're going to let this chill and then we'll come back and do our second turn. Okay, so our dough is ready for its second turn. As you can see, you can press on the butter a little bit and it gives. That's kind of what you're looking for. You don't want it to give so much that it's like melting in your hands, but if it gives a little bit, like it's kind of soft, then that's what you're looking for. Also, the dough is not super soft because it's cold. So in school they used to tell us you want it to be a temperature where when you roll it, the butter and the dough are rolling at the same rate. I used to have a hard time with that, but then I realized, when I finally realized what they meant, it was easier for me to visualize that. If you think about having your dough here and your butter here, they're the exact same temperature not necessarily the exact same temperature, because the butter would obviously need to be a little bit colder, or the dough would need to be colder than the butter. But if you were to have them both sitting next to each other, and you were to take your rolling pin and roll them, you wouldn't have to use more force on this one than you would on the butter. Or you wouldn't have to use more force on the butter than you'd have to use on your dough. You'd use the same amount of force and they would roll at the exact same pace. So that's kind of what you can visualize in your head when you think about rolling this at the same rate. So we're just going to tap it down a little bit. And that just helps flatten it so that we can roll it a little bit easier. And then we're going to rotate it and we're going to roll it. And just like earlier with our first turn, you kind of want to try and keep it in a rectangle. And you want to continue to go from the middle and pull it down. And this guy's not really cooperating, but we'll make it work. And you can see our butter is dispersing a little bit more, but it's still definitely a little bit chunky in our dough. So we're going to do our second turn. Kind of try and make this so that it's the same size as this down here. We're going to fold it once. And if you have any extra flour on it, you kind of want to try and get rid of that. Because, like I said earlier, you don't really want to add any extra flour to what's already in your dough. So this brush, this pastry brush that we've used for several other things, will come in handy. I have one that I use only for dough and flour, and then another one that I use for almost everything else. I like to keep one for egg wash, one for dough, and then one for like syrups and stuff. So that way they're not like intermixing. But you just brush any extra flour off. You could probably try and gently wipe it with your fingers, but again, anytime you touch it, you're adding that heat from your hands to your dough. So the brush is definitely a better option. And then you'll fold this one over. And you can see this side, this is exactly what you're looking for. It goes all the way to the edge. It matches, like this side, there's a little bit of there's not, like this piece doesn't go all the way to the edge here. So aim for this side where it's nice and square, rather than the side where this top piece is a little bit rounded. So once you do that, you're just going to tap it down a little bit to marry the two pieces again, and then you're going to pop it back in your refrigerator until you can roll it again at the same rate. So the butter in this is definitely too warm now to re-roll it, because if you were to roll it again now, it would just spread that butter into your dough, and you wouldn't have the nice layers that we're looking for. So you're going to do another 4 more turns, so it'll be a total of 6, including this one and the one we've done before. And then your dough will be good to go, good to use it for whatever application you want it to use it for. In this situation, we'll use it for the tart to 10. And I do have this quick puff that I made the other day that we can kind of compare it to. So you see, in the one that I made, the dough has the butter is not so chunky in it anymore. It's kind of like, it's kind of uniform. There's a few little pieces, but it's incorporated in it enough that it will give us the nice layers, but it's not so incorporated that it's become one with the dough. So if we were to cut this, you'd probably see some layers. It is quick puff, so it's not going to be as impressive. I don't know if you've seen some of the videos on like Instagram of people with their croissants, and they cut it and you can see the crossways with all the nice layers. It's not going to be quite as beautiful because we just quickly threw it together, but you'll definitely get some really nice layers out of this.